Hello everyone, Country Tiger here with Bengali Engineering and Play. We are back in Space Engineers, continuing on with the Survival Series 2. And this series, what sets it apart from the other survival series, is mostly that I'm playing out of character. So didn't jump into character, kind of just being me. So you see a lot of, dare I say, junk laying around. The intention here is to build a station. So this is obviously a space-based station. Um, and we're in semi-creative mode here. So I have Space Master turned on specifically because I'm really doing a lot of experimenting, trying to figure out how to make something work and fixing things when they don't. And turn the refinery off there. So I wanted to kind of do a tour um, to show you a little bit about what I've got going on here. Now, I haven't really demonstrated this, but my tendencies are to build things in somewhat of a modular fashion. And what I mean by modular is I build in pieces and then I copy paste those pieces together. So some aspects of Space Engineers has improved. The copy paste features have, I want to say, improved and not improved. So as objects get really very large, the copy pasting gets really wonky. So this may or may not work out how I intend, but I'm going to go ahead and try. So the idea here is that you build smaller blocks, as it were, pieces, and then copy paste them together. So as I've been kind of brainstorming with things, um, I've built these various blocks that are kind of the building blocks for what I have in my head, and taking what I have in my head as far as the station goes, and turning it into something a little more grandiose is going to be a challenge. But these are the basic building blocks. So some of these have come from other builds that I've used in the past. These two tunnels, glass tunnels over here, which I'm gonna zoom in on. We're gonna actually do a tour here. Um, and this landing pad over here is a pre-built thing. I used it in another build that I did. In fact, if you remember uh, the kind of the second series I did, no, I guess it was the first I did in character. There were actually two of these landing pads on the Nanite Control Factory shipyard. So these were borrowed from that. I do things very modular all the time. So I keep these larger scale parts because when I come up with a design that I like, even if it's part of another build, I tend to chop it off, and then now I have that as a parts and pieces, and I have a pretty large parts and pieces folder. Um, so I guess let's go ahead and do the tour, and then we'll talk a little bit more about where we want to go. Now, why did I like this particular landing pad? It's not particularly large size, so I couldn't land a big ship on it, that sort of thing. So here's why I like this one. So as most of my builds go, this one is what I've come to call the tri-conveyor system. So this is my builds mostly, not all of them, but mostly include uh, three completely independent conveyor systems. Um, the concept behind that is that most of Space Engineers is designed around an odd number of blocks. For example, the refineries, well, the refineries are the exception. Um, the reactors, for example, are either 1 block square or 3 blocks square. Um, the containers are 3 blocks square. The large or the hydrogen tank is 3 blocks square. So the idea is that you have an odd number of blocks. Now, when you're building something that takes advantage of that 3 wide kind of a thing, and you're doing 2 independent uh, conveyor systems, then what do you do with that third space? Do you just fill it with blocks? What do you do with it? So I decided, okay, arbitrarily, and I over-engineer everything. So this was really a resultant of over-engineering. Um, so my red is always the pull-in. So basically, if you attach onto that, it's going to suck everything out of all the cargo spaces on the ship. That's the whole point. It pulls everything out. You don't have to do a damn thing. You just sit down, lock on, and it pulls everything. Um, and I use that to ultimately pull everything in, and then it does a rather extensive sorting. Or the idea is there's an extensive sorting on the other end of that's going to um, put everything where it needs to be. So all the finished products ultimately go into mass storage, wherever that happens to be. Anything that needs refining is shunted over to the refineries, blah, blah, blah. So basically, pull-in system that is actually effective and works within the vanilla parameters of the game. And what I mean by vanilla parameters is you don't need anything special. There's a lot of inventory managers out there, 3 or 4 of them. 2, I think, have really taken the spotlight. Teleden's inventory manager, which it is great. It really does work very well. There's a lot of SE YouTubers out there who have used it. I don't pretend to know the first thing about it. In fact, I found it to be a little bit challenging to get programmed the way I really wanted it to work. So I haven't done any videos on it at all. And in fact, I probably won't, because there's enough people out there who are much smarter than I am who've used Tim very effectively. So I'm going to let them be the tutorials there. It is very effective. The problem is space engineers being space engineers, things break. So Tim, scripting-wise, kind of is broken. And that's nothing against Teleden and the magnificent work that particular script was. So a newer one, which I've actually found to be just as remarkable in its capabilities, is ISSI's Inventory Manager, actually called ISSI's Inventory Manager. It is very simplistic, and that's not a hostile statement. That's a true statement. Simplistic in that it is really, really easy to deploy, to install and deploy. Basically, you put it on, you do a very few minor configuration things, and then boom, it's done. And there's a description right there in the script, in the comments in the script, that tell you how to do everything. And there's also, just like with Teleden's, there's a page that tells you how to do everything. Now, the comparative between ISSI's and Tim is really about your level of programming ability and level to dive into things. Tim, I think, is extremely capable, and that's not to put down ISSI's Inventory Manager, which is also extremely capable. They basically do effectively the same things. I want to say Tim is much more configurable. So in the complexity of configuration, you can make it do just about anything. Setting up specialized containers, you can actually use a little code on every container, on every item, that tells it exactly what you want it to do, and the script will follow it religiously. So you don't have quite that level of flexibility in ISSI's, but you do have ISSI's kind of does it all for you. So even though there's not, it's not, at least in my experience so far, as configurable, it still does a magnificent service for you. So if you're into the inventory management, Definitely check those out. And I know I got off on a total tangent there. So pull in. We have green as our main supply system, which is basically an unfettered access to main storage, whatever that happens to be. Um, whether it's 50 containers, whatever, it's unfettered. There's nothing in between except a conveyor system. So the idea there is that I should be able to sit down on this, pull in what I need, push out what I don't need, and off I go. So simple, simple. Um, you know, the flexibility there is that I can move anything in or out, but the non-flexibility is it will not do that automatically. It's entirely a manual system. The blue um, was specifically for fuel and ice. So you connect onto that, and it would allow you access to both uranium ingots and ice. Um, Now, isn't that a little bit redundant next to the supply system, which also contains uranium ingots and ice? Yes, absolutely it is. So is it a useless system in and of itself? Yes, absolutely it is. But again, based on the odd number, do I put in an independent conveyor system, or do I fill that with, armor blocks? So I chose to put in an independent conveyor system, and I just happen to use it for fuel and ice, even though it is redundant. So the truth is ultimately at the core of the system, um, the two systems are interconnected, and they are interconnected in a way that does not allow materials to go back and forth. You can pull one of the mechanisms I used was you can actually push bottles through and pull bottles back through, but that's it. So once the ice and uranium goes across, it's there for forever. So is it a perfect system? No. Is it, again, a redundant system? Yes, absolutely it is. It's kind of useless, but hey, it makes up the third. So that is my convention when I'm building. So most everything I build is indeed a tri-conveyor system, which you see built in here. Now, my intention, and of course I totally boogered that up down below on the planet, which, the planet, let me see if we can find the planet. Here it is. So this was the planet where we started out. The idea, if you can see it on the screen, I know this is UHD, 950 kilometers away. And the reason I did that is somewhere, there we go. Somewhere is the desert planet, the Mars type planet, and it's in fact about equidistant. So about 900-ish kilometers away. So what I wanted to do is put the station dead center between the two. You can see the alien planet off here, and apologize for staring you into the sun there, but that alien planet is over yonder. So the moon, the Mars planet, and then the Earth-like planet, and right now you cannot see the moon for that planet, unless that's it. I don't think I can quite see it from here. So, where was I going with that? Mods. I was gonna blurb into mods. So the base on the planet obviously uses the shielding systems, and we're gonna continue that here. With the shielding system is Ezo's upgrade module, which is for the shields. He's he, she, not sure their gender. There's two different versions. There's an upgrade module which really just takes the place. It's a tri-capable module which just takes the place of the efficiency, yield, and speed module. And then there's one that works equally as well on the shielding systems, and that's the one I use because it covers everything. So it's basically a quad update module, upgrade module that does everything. So that's the one I use. So this particular world uses those, and I will, when I publish the world, I mean, you don't really have to publish it because it's a world, everything comes with it. which is actually really cool. I think they did a good job when it came to the publishing of worlds, because then you don't have to worry about what the hell does this, what are all these mods. You don't really have to worry about that. It all just ends up in there. The station here, I'm not going to publish the station on the world because that was drilled in and built. Yeah, you can paste into voxels now, but making everything work, I think would be a bit more challenging. So just copy pasting a ground based base, I think is a little more problematic, and that takes all the fun out of it anyway. Station, I think, would be a little more practical to have up on the workshop as a blueprint. So when I do that, and the intention, which is where I'm really going with all this, is the intention when I put something up on the workshop is to be as vanilla as possible. And that's mostly by convention, because everybody has a different interest in mods, in what they like as a mod, what they feel is overpowered, and what isn't. So there's some variables there. In my case, I wanted to have a station that was mostly vanilla, at least within the confines of what I won't even finish that sentence, because everybody has a different perspective on what's vanilla and what's not. Vanilla, if we go the actually religious purity, would be there's absolutely nothing on this build except for what's available in the vanilla game. And while I tried to steer towards that goal, there's certain things within the environment that I am building in, the goals that I have set for this particular survival series, that are going to make that a little bit challenging. One of the things that I want to do is I want to turn on the corruption PvE mod. That's by Lucas and company out there. That I find to be really, really fascinating. And the thing about that is it's a bit of an overpowered mod. And what I mean by that is, over the course of, so I watch two different SE YouTubers. I can't say religiously, because there's nothing in my life that is religious periodic, because I'm underway, so I have to kind of catch up on their videos when I get back, and I tend to watch their videos. I'm doing other things in the house, and I turn on those videos and listen to them in the background, and get my Snickers, and have a good time listening to them. And two different ones are actually using the corruption PvE mod, and it's in most cases kicking their ass. And the whole idea of the mod was that. But there's this continual one-uppedness kind of a thing, that as you install better armaments and that sort of thing, then Lucas and company have to up their game a little bit. So it is absolutely a mod that will kick your ass if you're not ready for it. So in this case, with this station, I felt it absolutely imperative that I'm going to have shields on this station, just for survivability. If and when, which is really to say when I turn that mod on. I'm building, so I didn't want to do that initially. So the idea behind this is that there are going to be a few mods. Now, one of the challenges, getting back to mods, with the tri-conveyor system is the ability to, for example, kind of hard to see, but all three of these, I'm going to come in really close here. All three of these conveyor systems come in together. Now, in the vanilla game, there's no way, the only way to run these through a bulkhead is to use a conveyor junction. And the problem with a conveyor junction is a 6-side connection. So effectively, I would be connecting all three of these conveyor systems together if I used junctions here. So unfortunately, even though I did not want to, now I love this mod. This is the Prosimian Armored Conveyors mod, and I love the mod. I use it in, I want to say 90% of my builds I use it in. And I really like it. There's been some evolutions over the years, some changes in models, and the model change, the last model change was a fantastic model change, but it also it fixed and broke some things at the same time. So some of the blocks reversed in the process of the modeling, the new modeling, which broke. Um, so if you built with the mod as it was originally, and then you came back and you loaded in that particular build, the blueprint, um, there were a lot of things that didn't work because these blocks had magically reversed, and you literally had to go through and rebuild. You had to figure out where they were broken, and the broken part of it was that your conveyor system just didn't work anymore. So it was the challenge to go through and figure out what was wrong. So oops, little problems there, but I understand modeling can be really very complex thing, and so the change in the models was great. It also added these little you see the red corners on each of these blocks. That's another really neat feature that basically says, is this active or isn't it? So it helps you in troubleshooting an awful lot in figuring out, okay, is this conveyor system actually functioning? So this is the corner pieces here are the same thing as the indicators on the Keen, the vanilla conveyor system. So it's the same thing, or at least on the straight through conveyor. So anyway, my problem was I had no way to build a complex, tri-conveyor system where it would go through bulkheads here all together. I would have to separate them out using the vanilla product. There is no product that can go through a bulkhead without interconnecting, which is to say that junction. That junction is the only thing that can go through a bulkhead and actually seal the bulkhead, which was problematic, which meant I really had no choice but to use some form of mod to basically accomplish the task that I had before me. So this was, I use it anyway, so I used it again. So this is one of the required mods to be able to load up this particular station because of the use of this tri-conveyor system. One of the other conventions here that I've started to use is putting in these LCD screens, and I like the idea of Sectan, for example, has a bunch of sign mods out there, and I love them. They're great, and I've used them on a few of my older builds and everything. And the only reason I don't continue to use those is because as I've been trying to build these vanilla builds, obviously if I add a sign mod into the build, I'm no longer vanilla. So I don't, and I have not done any videos which really showcase any of this older stuff that I've built. So one of the things in trying to steer back towards this vanilla concept is the use of LCDs. Now that LCDs are part of the game, so they're vanilla, is to use them as kind of signage. And in this case, because are you going to build a large station with just a single landing pad? The answer would be probably no. So in this case, just like it was in the original build, this particular landing pad is landing pad A. So I noted here A designator. And this landing pad was built so I could paste it on. Obviously, to paste it on, I'm going to have to remove this LCD. It's in the way. And it's intentionally in the way. That way people can look at it and say, oh, I know what this is. So before I paste another one in the world and actually want to connect it onto something else, I'm going to have to go through and change these designators. And what I mean by changing the designators, and of course we're not building, and I'm off on another tangent, but so lights, land pad A, land pad A, land pad A, land pad A. So the idea here is that the timers and everything function um, based on this landing pad A. And let me go ahead and so even though the corner lights themselves are not designated, the groups within the timers are designated. So if I have landing pad A and I cut and paste another landing pad A, then I now have two groups that are called landing pad A illumination. And it will screw up sorry about that. It will screw up the way the timers function. And I'll show you what I mean by that here in a minute, at least as far as what the functionality is supposed to be. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. So you see the groups here on the screen. I'm going to turn this back off. One of the reason why I liked this, so we're looping back around this huge broad circle. So if I know it's really hard to see, but this is connector LAN pad A pull-in switch lock. So this is the connector for the pull-in, and this is just the switch lock. So click, click. This is the main supply, and this is the fuel eyes. So this basically is the controller for those three connectors that you see out in the middle of the pad. So you could manually connect and disconnect. So if for whatever reason the ship that was setting down there could not or would not link on using their own mechanisms, then you could do that manually, which is why I put them here. So they're kind of useless, but at the same time. This was the real interesting thing. The whole the glory behind this was this was a fun project just to see if I could. It's using timers to do what they do, and so basically you see this is a standard configuration with the lighting sitting on the pad. Now by pushing this button, it turns off these main lights, turns on the warning lights, which are both yellow and red. So let me go ahead and push. So this is a T. So it turns off the main lights and turns on the landing pad warning lights. So basically you'll be able to see those from a short distance away, not very far away. Click it again, it goes back to normal lighting. So that was the real glory of the landing pad. The timer uses groups. So here's the scenario. I copy paste this, and so now I have two that have the same group designators. If I push this button here, because it's group based, it will then cycle everything that's happening on the other pad and vice versa. So it's important that you change the designators appropriately, because otherwise you're going to push a button here, it's going to affect something that you did not intend over yonder. So that's the whole idea here. So this is why I put designators on things when it's appropriate. Now some of this is just OCD me. So here's an example. So we have a station tunnel here, and I'll pan out to the side so you can see what this is. The A side, which logically, if you run that through, there's going to be a B side. Why do I differentiate between A side and B side? Because no real reason. It's just I know there's an A side and a B side, and really the reason is when I'm connecting this thing on, I want to know which door I'm talking about. So in this case, I have to go to this door, and I can see that this is tunnel 1 inner. Now this is tunnel 1. So obviously if I have a bazillion other tunnels, then I want to rename these to tunnel 2, tunnel 3, tunnel 4, etc., etc. So the idea here is that there are designators, and we want to change things accordingly. Now what's this this hideous pink gibberish on the outside? The reason I painted all this pink, and you see some actually out here on the scaffold units as well, these are things that are going to go away. They're not part of the build, even though they might be saved with the blueprint for this particular block. So these are for testing purposes, dare I say. In this case, I wanted to charge the batteries. So I wanted to have these batteries up pretty much as charged as they could be before I save them as a blueprint. Um, Mostly, because they'll have to charge later. Um, so all the pink stuff will go away, the hot pink. So let's pan out to the side here and show you what this is. So we have the well, let me back up again. So again, we have the prosimian blocks here, which are the straight through armored conveyor. Why did I do that? Because I have to. I had to have a way of tunneling through without connecting on. So I had to have something that will allow a conveyor to go through a bulkhead, seal that bulkhead, but still connect straight through rather than interconnect, which a junction interconnects. So I didn't see another choice, so this is a mod that is absolutely going to be required just because. I don't have an alternate mechanism to do this within a vanilla game, so I had to do that. These tunnels actually have 4 conveyors, 4 independent conveyors, and that was not really intentional. It happened because I stole this from another build, and I'm going to show you portions of that other build. I did a world that was supposed to be for the, I think it's UESC, and it might be USEC. Anyway, they do contests every once in a while for space engineers, and they did a world contest quite a while back now, and I missed it. I heard about it while I was underway, and the buddy of mine who was emailing with me just said, "Hey, this is what's going on. This is the basic parameters." And I was all like, "Okay, well, yeah, that'll give me something to do." So in my free time on the ship, I sat down and started designing a world according to what he had told me. And when I got home, I discovered, okay, well, 2 problems. Number one, I looked up the criteria and didn't actually meet the criteria. So, oops. And I also missed the submission window because I was underway. So that was another oops. Either way, I did post the world, and this was a portion. This was pieces. This was pieces of the pieces. So I, as I tend to always do, I build parts and pieces. So I had an idea of this particular style of tunnel in mind and was like, okay, I'm going to build this, which I did, and I'll show you what it originally looked like. And then pasted things together and eventually came up with the entire base. So this is pieces of pieces. So this was that original tunnel that was modified. Originally there was a conveyor above and a conveyor below, and ultimately those 2 conveyors were part of the same system. It was just how it spawned off. And the reason I did the conveyor above was because it was, and I'll show you what it originally looked like, but the door in this case was 1 block down, and the whole purpose of this upper conveyor was for air within the tunnel. So there was actually an air vent on each end, and of course the conveyor, and then there was a conveyor junction inside. This was a conveyor junction because it could be. And then there was another conveyor junction 1 block in, and then it pointed downwards. And then because this block was actually down here, so it was a 4 high build instead of a 3 high, and that gave room for that other block. In fact, that was why it was 4 high. And then in the center down here, there was another conveyor that was just a straight through. There was no connection point within the tunnel itself because there didn't need to be. The whole purpose was to get conveyor from one end to the other. This conveyor ultimately was interconnected in, but externally of that. But they were both connected. And then batteries was the same. So this is kind of a rebuild of that same tunnel, except with the tri-conveyor system. And the only difference here is that this conveyor system actually goes straight through now. It is not in use in any way within this scope. and we have pulled off of the fuel ice system for our ventilation inside. So at both ends you see the same air vent, so an air vent at each end, but it comes off of now the blue. Why did I do the blue? Because I couldn't get to, there was no way to get to the main supply. So normally it would be pulled off the green, although conventionally, because of what my use for the blue one is, the fuel ice, it also has air. So I can interconnect freely into, because of the connection between these two systems. And in fact, as you'll see as we build this particular station, you'll see that these are interconnected. And in fact, all the gaseous generation is on this blue side. So I do have an interconnector backwards, but it's, so I have a sorter, in fact, in my builds that, so I have a sorter that allows bottles through, and it allows uranium ingots through and ice through. It's a non-drain all, which means it's a manual pull. It does not pull everything. It just allows you to move it through, which basically goes from, in this case, using colors, the green side over to the blue side. And there's also a reverse connector, a reverse connection, which is to say a sorter going the other way. So it connects the blue back into the green, but the only thing it allows through is bottles. But because it's connected, then there's been some iterations of sorters over the course of time, and at one time sorters would allow gases to flow through in either direction. It was a connection point, therefore the gases could flow through. At one point, and I don't know if that's still true today, but at one point the gases would no longer go backwards through a sorter, which means you had to have a connection forward for that sorter to work, even though gases are not designated. But because it was an all or nothing in one direction only, you couldn't pull through gases. So if you had an oxygen tank on one side of a conveyor sorter that was on the wrong direction, it would not fill. And I don't know if that's true today. I have not tested that recently. So anyway, one of the modifications was to add this tri-system in, and like I said, now we're pulling off the air vents in this thing off that fuel ice conveyor system. So this is a 15, let me go down so you don't have the sun in your eye. This is a 15 length, 15 blocks. All these are large blocks, of course. So 15 large block length. So there's 13 blocks that are the windows, and then the two ends, standardized ends. This one here is a 25, so it's the same thing except it's 25 blocks in length. And this one I built, it's got a suspension mount here in the center. So the idea was for structural support. If you were to put this on like a planet or something, then obviously because mass is going to now equate to weight, then you need some way. So this was the structural engineering side of me playing a role here, even though in Space Engineers I shouldn't have bothered. So, but anyway, so obviously in a space environment where gravity is next to nothing, then you don't really need this structural support concept. So may change some things as I go, but again, I'm building the building blocks, right? So if I use this long one, great. If I don't use this long one, great. So two different size tunnels, effectively the very same thing. The only differential is it's got this mounting ring in the middle, and the rest of it's windows. What is this behemoth? Well, this behemoth is, believe it or not, based on this, because of the length obviously these are 3x3. You see a lot of storage things here. In fact, let me get to the other side so we can use the sun as lighting, and you can see what this really looks like. There's actually 5 sets of 8 large containers. Now these are vanilla, but having said that, we still have all the same pieces here. So here's the original tunnel, as you can see it ringed in the black. The reason I did that in the black is so you can say, oh, that's the connection point. So I can line all that up and poof, attach everything on. So that was to help me out. Obviously we have this LCD panel here, which you have to get rid of before you connect it on. So likewise, this is the A side, the opposite side is the B side, so you can easily reconfigure as you go. So this just keeps everything straight. 40 containers in this thing, so 8 rows of 5. They are all interconnected. In this case, they are interconnected between the supply, which is the green, and this top one. But they are ultimately interconnected. So this storage unit, what I call the storage module, does interconnect these two. So even though these two would be interconnected elsewhere, they are absolutely interconnected here. I use them both. So this thing got as large as it did for the purpose of storage. Now, does one need 40 large containers? Well, I guess it really depends on what you're doing. For those of you who have done large-scale mining and Space Engineers, you know that ore takes up a lot of space. So if you have a lot of space, if you have a lot of space, everything is grand. If you don't have a lot of space, then everything stops working, basically. It doesn't have any place to put anything. This behemoth originally was only going to be 2 rows, and then I just had this big gap underneath that I needed one more row to make it work, and so I did. And as I got to looking at interconnections, how am I going to connect this middle row? In fact, the row where I know my reticle is really hard. There's my reticle. So this lower row, and I'll call this a lower row simply because you can't see the lowest row, I had no way to interconnect it. Just because of where it was sitting, there was no way I could interconnect without, basically using these backside ports to loop around somewhere. And in the looping process, it was like, okay, how the heck am I going to put these in? So what I ended up doing is taking this lower section, which was right in the middle, this lower row of, in fact, let's go ahead and go down and have a look. This row right here of low down containers, I actually dropped it one more block, which is why this is a block lower than these. It's in fact 2 because I put batteries in the row, basically. And I put a conveyor junction in, which ultimately goes to the top port on each one of these, and then I just I ran 2 conveyors off that ultimately connected into each side of this next row up. So that was my connection point. So totally overkill, entirely redundant for every single one. And then because I had this gap here, it was like, okay, what am I going to put in this gap? So I put batteries in it. So this is just a shit ton of batteries. So this is not only storage, but storage. So electrical storage as well as cargo storage. So this is truly the storage module. It is modular. So we have an A side and a B side, which is identical. So you can plug it right into whatever you want to do, and off it goes. Okay, what are these other things? So I've talked about these 4 over here. So let's go ahead and go down to this junction, which is the neatest, most absurd thing so far. So glass, I love glass. So the idea, now there are airlocks top and bottom. One of the other things now that I'm on this one are elevator shafts. VCS. Give me half a second. I'm just going to bring it in. VCZ. Sorry, VCZ. Let me just go ahead and put it on the screen here. Oh, that's a little small. So this is available on the Steam Workshop. VCZ multi-floor elevator. The idea here is that you have there's two different types of shaft, and you build it one block at a time. It's either just a filler shaft or a vent shaft. You dump this elevator. There's like 5 or 6 different elevators, which are all different speeds. And you build the shaft how you want. You can have up to 9 ultimate floors from bottom to top, and it's all scripted. So basically, as you add things in, you add the bottom, you put the elevator on the bottom, whichever version of the elevator you want, and then you add middle floors as you desire, and then the top. So once you have a bottom and a top, it figures everything out from there. So basically your floors become whatever these middle floors are. So one is always the bottom, and then it figures out where the others are. So you can have up to 9 stops from top to bottom. So if you had all 9, then obviously your top, which is specific, to the build. It's specific. It is a designated block. Is the top. And then all the middle become script function, basically. So here you see what the bottom looks like. So anyway, I have not used this in the past. Wanted to add on large-scale elevators into my build. So this seemed to be the logical thing. And I in reading the comments here, I don't see anything that says, "Hey, this is broken." So built a 140-meter shaft. So one of the statements here. So what these couple of comments are. So your elevator from top to bottom, including, has to be 100. So with your bottom floor and your top floor, you can have up to 98 blocks in between. So the maximum is going to be 100 blocks, which should be 250 meters. So anyway, the question here, what will happen if you build higher than 100? Don't know. That might be a script limit somewhere in there, but only the host has a glitch. So there was an issue that it was not working in multiplayer mode, and apparently it does now work. So in fact, it says specifically, I think it's towards the top. Now works on moving grids, and now player-hosted multiplayer is now working. So it will not work in a multiplayer server environment, but it will work in a player-hosted multiplayer environment. So, but as they said from the very beginning, more than one person in the cabin at once works, but it is not pretty. It flings you around a little bit. So anyway, this was the elevator I used. So this is yet another mod that you have to have installed. Now, currently in my models of building, if you did not have this mod installed, obviously it would not insert all these blocks. It would not affect the build ultimately. Is that true? No, it would. It would open everything up, and I'll show you why. So let me put this back on the other screen. Get this off of this screen. And this is why, is because this would be a hole. This theoretically connects right onto here. So this was designed to be able to accommodate this thing here. I don't know that. Yeah. Okay. So this door I think is fine against this. It should be the corner of the door should be right here. If I built this all correctly. So the reason this is here is so I could have the visual reference on what I needed to do. So 2 different elevator shafts is the intention. You can see this one goes all the way through. So this was the other mod that I introduced for sake of kind of had to have it. How do you get from the top to the bottom easily? Now I could have put in those the passageways that are built into the game. Certainly, the downside to those is I'd have to put glass over the front. So I like elevators. Anyway, so elevator 1 side, the other side is an elevator 3 side. Why did I go from 1 to 3? Just in case I have other elevators. So the idea here was this is lock 1, going counterclockwise around this, or rather clockwise. This lock over here is lock 2, and then lock 3 on the far side over here, which is why that one got designated elevator 3, because it's next to lock 3. So this was the first block I built with the elevators, and once we get inside I'll show you exactly why that is. Getting the elevators, for those of you who are engineers, you know one of the most perplexing and challenging things is when you have different sets of pipe coming in and you have to send those pipes out in designated directions, all of them being interconnected. It ends up just being this spaghetti of pipes, which is exactly what happened here. This is why I went from normal survival building over to creative building, because I wanted to just right click and blow up a block, and left click and recreate a block in a different direction. It was to the point where I could, the time it took me to grind down a block that I knew now was incorrect and rebuild the other block was a pain in the ass. So I just stopped. So I clicked on my Space Master and started building, and I never took myself out of Space Master while I was building the rest of this stuff. So anyway, that's what happened there. But let's before we jump into this, well, maybe we will jump into this because I'm running up onto the end of this hour. So let's go ahead and go in here. Obviously I'm going to let the air out of here. This particular station, because it is a junction, it does have some oxygen generation. So one of the issues with Space Engineers, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, but air vents will only draw oxygen from oxygen tanks that are within a certain distance of that oxygen vent. And again, I don't know if this was intentional. I don't know how many blocks away that limit actually is, but what I've noticed is if I built a really large station or ship and I put all of my oxygen in one place, I can have a completely intact and using and running conveyor system, but my forward or aft air vents don't work, and they turn green. You know, you get that one green dot, but that one green dot which says I don't have any air to pull from. But you add a single oxygen tank, which then immediately fills up, and then boom, it all works. So it's one of those really strange things that seems to be unpublished, that your air vents have to be within a certain physical length of an oxygen tank. So what I went ahead and did was I built 4 oxygen tanks in here. So here's an interconnector. So this interconnector is this top conveyor system. And again, I have to use these Prosimian armored conveyors to do everything. But the interconnection here in this case connects it into the green, as you can see here. So what I went ahead and did was built the oxygen tanks because it was just a convenient place to put them. I had these straight through. conveyors and decided, yeah, let me just throw oxygen tanks in there. These are all vanilla. The oxygen generators are vanilla. The reactors up here are vanilla, small reactors. Um, there are the batteries that are built into these pieces. So there's actually, I think there's only 2 batteries in this particular one per side. So there's actually 8 batteries within this module itself, if I call this a module. 4 vents, which is just the way it worked. So I wanted to put vents in here. So this does not need 4 vents really. It could do very well with 2. Obviously the doors are intended to butt up against other like doors. So the tunnels were built reversed for a reason. So I paced the tunnel up against this, and now I have a complete airlock, 1 door and 1 door. So that was the idea here. So by using these end pieces, which I also mass produced, I just made an end piece, and then copied it. And the reason for that is now I have my template. So I can build anything I want based on that particular template and have a fine connection point for these tunnels that will just automatically match up. So that was the idea there. So this rat's nest. So here's what we have. We have our 3. In fact, let me go all the way to the bottom here because you can actually see it. So here's my elevator shafts coming in through the bottom. We have our 3 red, green, blue conveyor systems. Now, those have to ultimately go to the very top and go out, preferably in the same way. And we're junctioning, which means we're going to go out for each one of those. And all 3 of those systems in this case still have to remain entirely independent, so no connectivities. Now, everything in here you see is green. Now, one of the things you noticed when we first floated into this was all of those hot pink connectors. So conveyor systems, obviously, they have to be connected up to something, and then they will turn green. So the connectors on the outside actually were to give the conveyor system something, some endpoint device. So as I was testing, I would put the connectors on, which would now provide an endpoint, and if my conveyor system turned green, I know it's working. So the idea was I did these one at a time. So my green became my foundation, and the only thing that screwed up the green, so the green could come in and go straight out. That was the up from the bottom, out through the top, splined on in the center, and out to all 4 directions. So it was basically a junction in the middle with ins and outs on every single side of the junction. Okay, poof, done. Now, what mucks up the system is these elevators, as you see, are directly adjacent. Well, one block off, but adjacent to the green on 2 of the sides. So all of a sudden, I had to figure out, oh God, I gotta make the green. Now, yes, these are interconnected, and the reason they're interconnected here is because there's actually elevator shaft air vents. So these are actually connected onto air vents. So what I had to do, let me turn my light on here. What I had to do is figure out how do I intermesh all of this stuff, and I really tried to stay vanilla, which is why you see I'm not using any non-vanilla blocks, with the single caveat of at the ends I'm going through the Prosimian armored conveyors. So the armored conveyors are on the outside, the outer bulkheads. That's the only place I've used them, and I did that very specifically. So I did the green, The green was everything. Originally, I was in my mind saying, okay, I should be able to do this symmetrically. Um, but not the case. And the reason why is that all of these um, are consistent. And I could go into a lot of energy to show you. So the goals, okay, 3 goals. All 3 had to come in and go out 6 different directions, all interconnected without connecting to one another. Okay, so that was goal A. Goal B, the elevator comes in and goes out and stops here. So there's actually a floor right there. And in fact, even without the working elevator, it does work. So that is working elevator stop. So in the process of all that, I wanted a catwalk that ultimately is going to interconnect all 4 of these directions. So the idea here is that tunnels come out from here. So this is a junction, truly a junction. So the rat's nest ultimately meant I had to come in and go out. The only one that is symmetrical. So from top, I come in with blue on that side, go out with blue on the same side.
Low.
And that's because my other tunnels are identical to that. So I had to stick with the convention. Whoops, that was not what I wanted to do. I really wanted to do that. Okay, and yes, I know I just let all the air out. All right. So, hard to see, but pick a side, any side, you'll see it is from left to right, red, green, blue. So let me shift over to this one, and you're going to see magically red, green, blue. We'll do it again. Red, green, blue. And finally, red, green, blue. Now, why did I do that? Because as I built these tunnels, red, green, blue. Now, the only exception to that is where I'm on the opposite end of the tunnel. I'm now, so my B side actually is the one that interconnects. And originally my A side was the one that was this designator. So obviously when I'm putting these tunnels on, I'm going to have to put them on in the correct direction. So that was the other reason to designate an A side or a B side. So anyway, the idea here was conventionally red is on my left, so that's the way I designed this. So every connection point, the red was always on the left. So that just added to the mayhem of this particular thing inside. Now let's run all the way to the top, and you'll see this scaffolding device here, which is the exact same thing. So red, green, blue, red, green, blue, red, green, blue, red, green, blue. So, and then again, the same thing down here, red, green, blue, but reverse depending on which direction you're going, and then the same thing up here. So this one follows the exact same conventions as the one at the bottom there, the glass one, except it's, dare I say, unmanned. Now, it does have the elevators going through. It does actually have an air vent in the middle. So it is connected on there, not quite in the middle. It's actually either one down or one up. I think it ended up one down from the center. So the idea here was, I don't know that I'll use this. I just had it in mind and was thinking, okay, what if I need to interconnect? And the idea behind this one was I actually have long, well, okay, let me back up a step, and this is going to get modified before it actually gets into production here, because it's not exactly what I want. So the idea behind this one and where I was going with it was, I have the reason why it didn't get built to this standard was I have my standard what I call pod mounts, And my pod mounts are based on the concept of it would be nice to have modular pods that have a single mounting base, that it's actually merge block based. So basically, I bring it in, I set it down, and it's a multifunction pod that can do anything. So it could be storage, it could be processing, it could be anything, but it uses the same conventional mod base. And I built this, and I built a bazillion pods for it, and I've had a lot of fun with it. So the idea was that pod base was ultimately updated, I think I'll say, over time to include these three designators, these three different conveyor systems. And so the purpose here was it did not need to be manned, but what I would do is connect on. I have a quad and an octal pod base that could actually go out from here, and the outer end of that pod base actually has connectors on it. So you could actually bring a ship in and connect on to those connectors, and ultimately get to any of the three systems just by way of connecting on. So that was the purpose of this thing. Now, to connect on those pod bases directly, and the reason I didn't want to use the pod bays or the pod mounts, and the reason I didn't design this directly was because now I have to add in another mod. That particular mod uses Killer Corporation's conveyor expansion mod, and if you haven't played with a conveyor expansion mod, I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic mod. It basically adds in T's, crosses. It uses the standard, conventional models. It just changes those models for all the other designated things. So it's basically all of your vanilla. So in vanilla, we have two types of conveyors, right? We have the straight through, and we have the angle or elbow. I call it an elbow because I've done a lot of plumbing over the course of my life. To me, that's not an angle, it's an elbow. So I call it an elbow, even though in the game it's called an angle conveyor. Or curved conveyor. I think it's called a curved conveyor. Which kind of, I guess, it works, but it's an elbow. It's a 90-degree elbow. So the Killer Corporation mod has all of the different conveyor pieces that you always wanted. So it has the 5-way, it has the 6-way, it has a T, it has a cross, it has a corner piece, and without really being able to describe that. So in one way, out 90 degrees, and out the bottom. It has an edge connector, which is basically a T that you lay flat and then have an out the bottom. So you have all of these pieces that you didn't have otherwise in a conveyor rather than in a 6-way junction. So in the base vanilla game, we have three options: in out in a straight line, in out in a 90 degree, or in out in all 6 directions, which is exactly why I had to put in the Prosimian mod here, because I needed a way to get through an airtight bulkhead without interconnecting. Okay, so I didn't really have a choice there. Now, Killer Corporation, again, is basically the conveyors that you always wanted, but they're not sealed. So they're just like the other conveyors. You can run them through a bulkhead, but now you have this big gap around the bulkhead. So one of the neat things about the Killer Corporation conveyors is you actually have a non-mergeable conveyor. So the conveyor comes out, um, picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So let me go ahead, I'm going to go off screen for just half a second, and let me go ahead and bring in a pod base because I can demonstrate everything I need to demonstrate with that pod base. Sorry, I have to find it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and bring in the octopod base just for demonstration purposes because it really is kind of neat, I think. Okay, so I've pasted that into my blueprints folder. Okay. Oh darn. Okay, and I know what that is actually. So let me go ahead and rotate that around. Here I was talking about the pasting earlier. This is what I mean. Okay, this is the stupid pasting, inability to paste that they've never fucking fixed. Try and paste that in the world here. Okay, so let me get in close here. So what you see is a 3x3 base. You see all three of these going through, which now that I see they're entirely reversed, which is going to be fun. Interestingly enough, my designation of right to left is backwards from what these were built, although I could just turn them over. So this actually can work either way. Now, one of the things that's missing on here is Sec10 signs, which I think, okay, I thought it was the connectors. It's not the connectors. It is, in fact, Sec10 sign 2, I think was what was on here. So each one of these pods was labeled. And in fact, I think it's on this side, they had buttons. Oh, the buttons are missing. Oh, right, because the single button is not standard vanilla game. Never mind. Okay, so back to where I was going. So we have, so this is my standardized pod base. So the idea here is this is completely non-mergeable. Now, you're saying I'm staring at, Kenty, get your shit together. I'm staring at a merge block, so how can you say non-mergeable? So merge blocks merge and unmerge, okay? Which is to say they connect grids and disconnect grids. So what I mean by non-mergeable, merging means they are permanently connected. So the idea behind this is there's nothing here that will let something permanently connect. So what do I mean by that? I've got these corner blocks here, which are non-mergeable. Okay, they will not connect surface to surface. So in this case, if we think about things, whoops, just ran out of power. No biggie. Used to be a biggie, but not a biggie anymore. This is a 6-sided block. Okay, now you're not thinking about this as a 6-sided block because hey, it's an angle block, right? It's a corner block, but no, it's still the same basic model with 6 sides. In this case, 3 of those sides do not connect to anything. Okay, so they are not connectable. But on the other 3 sides, in this case, the block where my reticle is, the far side, the bottom, and the left side are connectable. Okay, the top, the right side, and the side closest to me are not connectable. Okay, so that's a designation within the cube. And I do say cube very specifically. Every single one of these blocks is a cube. Even though it might not look like it, it is still a cube. Whether you can connect onto one side or the other of that cube, one side or not, of that cube is actually part of the configuration for that cube. So, what we have here is a block that can butt right up against another block but cannot connect to it. So, we were talking about mergeless conveyors. So this is mergeless conveyors. This is it's available in the Killer Corporation conveyor expansion. Give me half a second. Again, picture's worth 1,000 words. So let me go back into I have to log into Steam again. And pardon me for a second, I have to go out. I have to get my phone because Steam feels themselves important enough to have this feature called Steam Guard, which I absolutely despise, but half of the features will not work without it. So you are stuck with using it whether you like it or not. Okay. So what I have to use is when I'm logging onto Steam from the web side, Steam will come right up with no problems, but on the web side I actually have to log into Steam, which is kind of a pain in the butt. Alright, I was looking for Killer Corporation, which is a mod that I have had installed for forever, so it's going to be probably at the very bottom. Alright, and bring my browser back in here. Conveyor expansion. So, oh, sorry, we'll go here. So, here it is. So this is everything it brings to the table. So you have a 6-way, the 5-way is probably this one here. We have a corner, we have an edge, can't see it, but there's a port out the bottom. We have a cross, we have a cap. I've never used that, but we have a T. This is the mergeless conveyor here. We have an access hatch. These are kind of cool. I've used these in a couple builds. This is a mega connector. I think this connector is actually a 2x2 connector. We also have an armored conveyor, which is really cool. So you can, or an armored connector. It functions exactly the same way as a connector, except it's armored. It's armored and it's also airtight. So if you are building something that's inherently airtight, then you put this in. And you see just all the different pieces. This is another really neat feature. If you do a lot of small ship building, there's a lot of really neat stuff. So you have the same, you have an armored conveyor for the small ships, which is a large armored conveyor. You have the small armored conveyor, and you actually have a different small, you actually have a small connector. So the vanilla game only has an ejector in the small. So I think that's still true. But here's this mega connector over here, which actually connects onto, I think, 3 different, oh, it's 2 blocks wide. So you can actually, I think, run 2 conveyors into it simultaneously. I've never used one of those, so I don't know exactly what the advantage is, because you really have no limits of what you can pull through. It can pull through a lot. I've never seen a limit of the amount you could drag through. I dragged through um, piles in creative that had trillions of items, trillion iron, and it came through, just drag and drop through the conveyor. So I don't think there's any physical limits on the conveyor. So even though these two blocks look identical, this is the hatch, which is indeed identical in model, and the non-merge conveyor. So the mergeless conveyor. And the reason that is important, let me scroll this back down, is when you are trying to build things that are going to merge together, then this conveyor, when you turn the merge blocks on, so the blocks merge, if you turn those merge blocks off, and these are standard conveyors, you have created a permanent merge point. So these mergeless conveyors will now break apart, and what I mean by break apart is they will separate. There's no damage to them, but they will separate. And so this pod bay here in this case will merge and unmerge, but allow you to connector through, as in conveyor goes through. Now this particular merge block, because I was looking at things and saying, okay, this is going to have to be three wide, one way or the other, so I need a conveyor and a merge block. But because things really don't like to be an even number of blocks, then that meant I had to be 3 wide. So it ended up 2 merge blocks. And then I was thinking, okay, well, if I'm having to do merge block, connector, merge block, or rather merge block, conveyor, merge block, then I'm 1 by 3, which means I can't do anything with that either, so it's going to have to be a 3 by 3. So let's just go ahead, and this is my standard format. So the tic-tac-toe board format, I have 2 merge blocks and 3 conveyors, which doesn't matter, but my thought process was, okay, if there were a limit per conveyor, then we have eliminated that limit by making it 3 conveyors all next to each other, which ultimately merge in down here. So these 3 are right next to each other. These are T's down here. So as you can see here, I'm using the Prosimian armored conveyors as well. So in this case, there's actually 3 different, there's probably 4, but there's 3 different mods here. So it's the Killer Corporation conveyor expansion, what I showed you there on the screen. We have the Prosimian armored conveyor blocks, which is here, and we actually have Drifting Thoughts. Can't remember what they were called, but it's basically there's a 2 block, a 3 block, and a 4 block long conveyor. It's just a straight through conveyor, no angles or anything. So that's here as well. And I think, I'm not sure, but let's have a look. I think there are cameras. Nope, there aren't. Oh, yes, there are. Okay, so these cameras are right here. You can't see them, but they are actually they're mounted to the top of these connectors, so it's an offset. So the block that's the mounting block is actually above the camera, which is underneath it. Okay, so in this case, the physical block, and let me okay, so we use the game to demonstrate. So remember that red the red surrounding indicator. So the red surrounding indicator around the block itself, this is an elevator block, so forgive me for that. In fact, let's go ahead and go over to a standard block here. So the light armor block, so the light armor block being encased in red says I can't build here, right? The red open block that you see next to it, in this case behind it, there's something there. If you right click, you're going to delete that one, right? Okay, so that block is there. That's the mounting block, and it's in fact mounted on the top of the conveyor. The camera, again, picture's worth 1,000 words. Okay, this is, let me go ahead and change to, this is number 8. And let's go ahead and put this out here for a second. Okay, you can see it. So in this case, we would mount onto this corner block. Let me turn this around so you can actually see the camera. Now the camera's upside down, okay, but you can see that the mounting block, which is in red here next to the scaffolding there, above the scaffolding, but the camera's hanging, in this case, above it, okay. Normally you would turn this over so it was facing down. And that's exactly what we have here, is the camera is inside the connector block. Now, why is that advantageous? Why do I love these cameras so much? Because you now have an actual view of your connector. So the other neat thing about these is they actually put a really neat reticle onto the camera itself, so you can kind of have an idea of how to line up. Unfortunately, I can't show you that because you would need to be sitting in a chair of some kind, a control station of some kind, to see it. But these things are really great because you paste them in and they actually give you a view inside that connector. Meaning I'm looking out the front of that connector. I can line up directly on. I can say, okay, come left, come right, come forward, come backwards, and line somebody directly up. So those cameras are really neat. So this is another mod that's actually involved here. My pod mount has 4 mods on it inherently. That are over and above vanilla, which is why I did not build this guy. I mean, in the core, in the back of my mind, this guy was for this. This is why this was here. On the flip side is because I now have to have inherently 3 other mods for this thing to work. Then that adds 3 more mods onto my mod list for something that I really, really wanted to be vanilla, or as close to vanilla as possible. So instead of having 2 mods, which I do now, I'm gonna have, inherently 3 more mods, or 1, 2, 3. I've already got 1, so it's 4. So I've got 3 more mods that I have to add on. Now, not really true because I'm using Ezo's upgrade cube and energy shields, so there's automatically 2 more mods. So I've got 4 mods inherently built into this thing. So having another 3, would that really be a problem? I don't know. I guess it depends on. In a world mod, no. But. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that there. I am way over, so we might as well just go to the 2 hours and be done with it. Okay, did this one connect on? No, good. Okay, I did not want that one to connect in. In fact, let me go ahead and I want to move that away. Okay, so let's talk about these 2 other things. This is a scaffold. All it is 25 blocks long, and it takes these 3 things in and out. Okay, so red goes all the way to the bottom and comes out. Now, what are these things on the side? So the intention here was to be able to provide mount points for turrets. Okay, so there's 1 on each side, even though this is octagonal, 1 on each side. So we have top, center, and bottom. So that's all this thing does. Now, having said that, there is actually a battery on the top and the bottom, and the battery was really because
No energy.
I needed a way to power an antenna, so I could actually turn on the HUD. I built all this and then was like, oh wow, I need to designate elevator 1 shaft versus elevator 3 shaft. Oh boy. Um, anyway, the evolution there. So I added in a container, which happens to be at the bottom. I think it's at the bottom. Um, that was specifically for ammo. So it's part of my ammo container, distributed ammo. And the idea was that if I have, let's say, Gatling turrets, so we stick with purely vanilla. So we put a bunch of Gatling turrets on here, and somewhere in the damage on the station, we sever our green supply line, which all these are connected into. Um, then my turrets run out of ammo, and I'm done. Those turrets that are on the other side of that break now have no ammunition. So I always like to have a local, or what I consider a local ammo box, which can be filled, and then ammunition is there. That way, if I do break back to the main container set, the main storage, that I do have local ammo that I can still protect myself while I'm trying to figure out what the hell happened to my conveyor system. So, ammo, there is a battery at the top and the bottom. So this is just a basically conveyor, elevators, all the way through, and scaffolding. Oh, so scaffolding, unfortunately, is, not unfortunately, but this scaffold mod, which I've talked about in the past, it provides 4 blocks. Okay, let me punch up Control 6. Provides 4 blocks, so this is 6, 7, 8, and 9 in my toolbar. It's a solid block, an angle block, a slope block, a corner block, and an inverted corner block. That's all there is. And it is basically taking I think it's a light armor block model base. So it's basically you first build it, boom, there it is. It takes that model and uses that as a finished block. So basically it's a finished block, but it uses the model of the first stage of building. So it's basically a finished block, so none of your like the build and repair system or the Nanite factory will not attempt to finish it. So that's the downside to those types of mods, is that unfinished blocks are awesome because they add an aesthetic value there, things that you can do aesthetically which you cannot do with the vanilla blocks, which is really to say you can't do them with the finished vanilla blocks, but you leave them unfinished and then all of a sudden you have all this stuff. But the downside to having an unfinished block is when you have, such as the build and repair system, such as the Nanite control factory, that will seek out those unfinished blocks and finish them for you, then you completely screw up your aesthetics by way of, well, I didn't want that block finished. But in really neither case of those particular mods is there a way to designate, and I'm lying to you here, there's no way to designate, leave this the hell alone. That is true with the Nanite control factory. If it finds a block on the grid, it's going to finish it for you. In fact, on neighboring grids, it's going to finish it for you. There is actually a way to turn off the finish feature, and I'm being a little misleading. So let me back up and state that a little more directly. In the nanobot build and repair system, there is a function called ignore block, and you set up an ignore block based on the block's color. So if there is a color, which of course can be unique to every block, even non-colorable blocks have a color designator. So regardless of whether it's colorizable or not, it still has those same color bits in it. So the build and repair system can actually look at those color blocks, those color bits, and say, this is the color designator, ignore this. Okay, so that's, so I lied to you, but I also told you why I lied to you. So you can, in fact, use unfinished blocks as long as you paint them a particular color. And of course, you're not going to see that color. You're only going to see this bare metal type stuff. But I use the scaffolding block, and again, I've talked about this before. So the scaffolding block here in this case is yet another mod that we have to have installed for this station to function. So if I put the station up on the workshop, I'm going to have that as a mod. Otherwise, this is going to look really, really silly. In fact, it might actually fall apart. So I've got a reactor and an antenna on here, and that was exactly because I needed to turn the HUD on. And of course, the only way your HUD actually works, or to turn on a block's HUD identifier, you have to have an antenna connected to the grid. So that was the antenna, and then I wanted to charge the batteries, and I had to power the antenna, so I put in a Kenti reactor here. So the Kenti reactor, and the reason it's painted the hot pink is because it's going to go away. That should be obvious enough. You should look at that and nearly double over and vomit. So that says this is going to go away. So that's why those are that color. So scaffolding, that's all that is. It's a 25 block scaffolding, which I just think would look really cool on a station, which is why I built it. These two look strangely similar. So to say this one is based on this one is actually a true statement. Now, what's the difference? Well, let's go to the bottom first. So building here, one of the things you'll notice, so we have a 5x5 grid. We have our tic-tac-toe board in the center. We have, obviously, we have our 3 conveyor systems, which go all the way through. Now, we are tying off of the main supply system to connect in these 4 ports on the outside, which ultimately will be for whatever Gatling turrets, whatever turrets that you want to put on here, really. So when this ends up on the Steam Workshop or as a world, you can tear off what I've put on and put these up. So the idea there is that gives you ports. Those are all actually interconnected into the main supply system, which is green. So they pull off the center one. But ultimately, you see in this tic-tac-toe board, I basically go out on the T shape. So basically up and down, right and left is being consumed. But we have these 4 corners of the tic-tac-toe board that are not in use in any way, which is really to say, yes, things go through them, because obviously I'm tying onto these mount points for the turrets. But mostly all the way up and down this thing, those 4 corners are not in use. And that was why this other one, let me get you all kinds of dizzy. Why this other one, hard to see, but it has build and repair systems in it. Some are upside down, some of them are right side up. But ultimately, I think there are 48, might be 42, build and repair systems all within this scaffolding. So this scaffolding is called, ironically enough, the station, which was, so I have parts and pieces that are for different build types. So I have a glass station, and then all the modules, go ahead and call them modules because they're building blocks for a station that's not assembled. So I can assemble those building blocks however I want. And I do that a lot, as I said at the very beginning of this video. So this one is just called station. That was the idea there was to differentiate it from a glass station, which I have. I was building it. It was kind of based. For those of you who have actually played through the tutorial scenario that Keen provided, there's a moon base that's actually really cool. I liked it, and the glass tunnels and everything. I really liked it, and that was the kind of the basis concept. I wanted a station that I could sit on the ground, so it was ground-based, and that was called my glass station. So I started building modules for that. So in this case, this was just station. So really, really boring, but station. So that was my designator for this particular one. So this happens to be the BRS scaffold, which is identically in size and shape. to this scaffold, which is just scaffold. So this is a 25 block scaffold. This also is a 25 block scaffold. This also runs all three of those independent systems all the way through, those conveyor systems all the way through. It also has the ability to put on, there's these 12 mount points for turrets. We also have our vomit color antenna and reactor to dismantle here. The other convention I did here was mostly to keep me coordinated. So we have two different elevator shafts, so I needed to be able to easily identify which shaft this is. The other side was to identify top and bottom. Now, normally top and bottom wouldn't be an issue, and actually it kind of isn't here, because, I mean, the colors, you can look at them and say, okay, I need to swirl this around one way or the other. But because I use the colors conventionally against this guy, which is to say this glass junction, then I had to designate a top and a bottom, so I did. So really, we have 4 LCDs on each one of these, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom, and the top and the bottom references really just say, let me just go right over here. So this is the elevator 1 shaft, lower end. Hey. And this is the elevator shaft 3, lower end, and of course at the top it says the same thing except upper end. Okay. So I had to be able to designate up and down, which wasn't really as critical as being able to identify which elevator shaft this is. And why is that important is because I've named all the elevator vents. So you see down here there is a air vent. See the little yellow designated there. This is an air vent filler for the elevator shaft. So this is in fact elevator shaft 3 vent blah blah blah. So I've designated where these vents actually are. So anyway, the fact that I have designated these elevator shafts is the reason I ended up putting signage on here. And I used a standard LED because it is, or LED display, because it is vanilla. I didn't have to actually put on any kind of designators. All right, so let me see. I've got a couple minutes left, and now that I've gone way over the 1 hour, I'm just going to go right straight to 2 hours. Let's take a look at this. Now, for those of you who actually did look at the base I built for the I think it's UESC competition, you might recognize this. And this is a piece out of the base I built for that. And the reason I yanked this out of that base is because this to me is the Christmas tree topper. Okay, this concept here is what I want to do on the top of my station, however tall that station happens to be. So I yanked it out. It is as is, just yanked out of that station. So what I wanted to do, and we'll do a lot of this on screen, is modify this thing to actually be compatible with how I've built all this other stuff. So there's going to be a lot of modification here. I like this upper thing. So we have antennas up here. We have, in fact, antennas up here. Now this station is entirely vanilla. The entire station was vanilla. There was nothing that was not vanilla on the station. So these are standard antennas. These are standard laser antennas. We have standard missile turrets out here, standard couplers, everything. So the supply system comes up through here, and then it gives you 2 connectors which ships could connect on up here. That would be basically, my vision is that this will be my main supply system. And we have a simulated antenna. There may be a blinky light up here. No, there isn't. And then we have this observation station, and I really like this observation station. Again, it's entirely vanilla. So we have our air vents in here, which are drawing off the main supply. I don't know if there's an oxygen tank in here. I don't know if there's actually... I'm looking for an access point, and there isn't one. So probably what I would end up doing in my modification would actually put an airlock up here somewhere. Now, obviously we're using corner blocks, and then we're double layering, as you can see here. So the inside of this is 3x3, which is encased in glass. We have this this conveyor system going up the center, and then ending up at the top here. I see. Oh, that's just the airlock going in. So there's no elevator here. So the idea is that if I stick this on the top of something, I need those two elevator shafts to go up. Which of course is going to be a problem for the glass. So the idea here is that ultimately I want all three of my so let me back up a little bit and show you where I'm going. So the scaffold junction. So let's say we take this thing off as it is. We take it off. We design it so it will go book right onto the top of that particular thing, and that particular thing is going to we're effectively going to terminate those the red and the green, or sorry, the red and the blue, but the green will go on through and actually be the supply for this thing. Those elevators will come up through and terminate in this space. Okay, so this will be the top. Okay, and this thing, which ultimately I think I'm going to keep this. So this portion is going to chop off, and then this bottom part is going to go away. I'll talk a little more about that just because. So what I wanted is this upper section, including the windows, to be the station Christmas tree topper. That's what this was going to be. So that's why I have this pasted in the world here, is because I want to take this, modify it, and turn it into, this thing that will stick on the top of that. So in this case, this junction will be we will probably end up using the quad rather than the 8, although there's no reason not to use the 8. Around this scaffold junction, and then the scaffold junction will actually have just a boatload of solar panels on it that will basically be the connectors end to end, which is really to say this quad, cardinal direction things that ultimately I will put solar panels on. So I don't, again, the vision in my mind on where it is versus where all these different things, I want to build a fairly large solar array. After all, you're in space, you're in the sunlight, and solar energy is incredibly abundant. So anyway, the idea here was to take this off, use this as the tree topper, and figure out how to do it. But what I ultimately want to do under this thing, even though this thing only needs the main supply system, is to spawn off all three of these conveyor systems independently underneath this. So that's where this idea came in, that I can either just spawn them off or use an already built system of conveyors and pod bases in this case. The problem is even though I've got these pod bases already built, I still need some way to have, in this case, I still have to add on those those mods that I'm using in this thing. So in this case, I have to add those 3 different mods, or 3 additional mods onto it. I also have to modify this guy just slightly, this guy here, to accommodate that, because you see the designator here, how this thing is built, is very similar in size to these guys. Even though it's different, it's very similar. And that's because I also built this with a particular thing in mind. Now, having said that, this really is only 5 wide. So my idea here was to continue this out in a 5 wide pattern that this thing would connect directly on. So I think I can still do that very easily, in fact. So we'll put the slope here. So these corner pieces will be sloped, and then we go from here all the way across to here, and then slope. So this will be really easy to modify, and then I'll copy paste it. Why is there a blue merge block? So in some of the older iterations of the game, and this is dating this particular piece of equipment here, you couldn't just copy paste. If you copied an item next to another item, even if it turned green and was sitting right up against it, it wasn't actually connected. So the merge block forced the connection. So merge block to merge block would then merge everything together, and it would merge. So that's why this merge block is still here, even though today that is not the case. It will merge on its own. So let's go ahead and talk about this. So this was the original. Get up here far enough that you don't have the sun glaring sideways. This was the original tunnel. So it is a little bit different, and let me in fact come out to this end so you can see what it is. So I was talking about how this tunnel was designed. So you see this same, in fact, 7x3 that you see over here. So we have 7x3 here. So you see that same flavor of connection point here, but it's in fact 7x5. So what I did was chop the top off and chopped the bottom off so it became a 7x3. What I had to do there was move the door up. I moved all 3 of, so this was conveyor system. This one is straight through conveyor system, so in and out, no connections in between. This conveyor system was in here specifically because of air. So I put air. So let me go ahead and go in. I think this is still powered. Yes, it is. It's got batteries. Here's the air vent. So we had this top one that comes in. It's a junction. Into another junction, into an air vent, battery on the backside, windows, and then the doors underneath. If I took this section out, which is really to say shrunk this down by 1 block, then all of a sudden I have this door coming into the backside of this thing, so I had to move that. So on the new tunnel iteration, this became the straight through. And then this bottom section, in fact, where the door is. So this one became the straight through, chopped the top off. And these 3 then became the 3 separate conveyor systems, and then this whole entire bottom section was gone. So the nice thing about this particular system, and the reason it kind of ended up like this was purely aesthetics. So I had a 2 slope and a flat plane window and a 2 slope. So basically I had this wide open architecture. Now I tried this with the flat, and you lose a lot of view, which is why this became the sloped also at the 2 slope to maintain the aesthetics. And then underneath, um, the whole idea behind this bottom part was to encase this um, this conveyor. So this conveyor now has armor all around it. And to do that, I ended up with the armor on both sides, and then this armor, which really isn't armor. I think it's called a glass shutters or something like that. And there's not a scrap of glass in this, but it's called a glass shutter. At least I think. Let's go ahead and find it. It's this vertical window. Okay, so I don't really see that it's a window because it's not airtight. But vertical window. So window with no glass. Anyway, so that ended up underneath. And again, I like the aesthetics of it. So this whole piece was about aesthetics. I have the mounting thing up here at the top.
No
So
energy.
what I would wish for if I had a wish for blocks is a block that goes. What would be really cool is a half block that is just like the half block, except it's all sloped in. Oh, yeah. And I don't remember the last time I saved my game. Damn it. That sucks. No, I'm not going to send a log. You guys don't fix shit anyway. Alright, we'll see if we can load back in. Damn it. So, if I were to have my druthers, it would be the half block. This is gonna suck when I come back in. Now, thankfully, I have saved everything. There's nothing in the world that isn't saved, which is a good thing. But it's going to look a lot different when we load back in because there's the 8 thing, which of course I did paste in, and I have the old chop down version of the my Christmas tree topper is the chop down version, which is fine because that's ultimately what I was going to do with it anyway. But the reason I didn't have the chop down version is I wanted to show you what it looked like. Anyway, my druthers would be a regular 1x1 block that would basically be a half block that's angled in towards the center, and then a pillar stuck out the top. So basically you have this block which you can use as a mount point or a suspension point. So either like a flat catwalk plate with a pillar stuck into it, and then there may be while this is booting here, let me go back out and actually look, because there's a mod that is effectively combination blocks. And I'm going to see if I can find it. It's actually a really neat mod. Corruption PvE I talked about. Block combinations. So let's pull this back over, and then there may actually be a block like what I'm talking about. Sorry, blind you. Maybe not. So this looks like all of the blocks. So this puts a button on here. It puts button bars. I don't see that when there's probably a light. But what would be nice is to have a block that you can use for structural support. And of course it's entirely visual, because do you really need structural support in Space Engineers? And the answer is no. But to me, if I have this really long span of something, the engineer in me is just screaming, oh my god, this is going to break, when in fact it won't. So I just have these little quirky things that I need either suspension or support. So having a combination block that actually would be, I mean, ideally, I think it would really look the best to have a half block with pillar. So you have the half block and you have a half pillar that are connected together in the top, and then the half block actually is a sloped block all four directions, sloped towards the center. And it doesn't have to be 45-degree angle, a 60-degree angle, whatever. I think 60 would look better, um, but so basically sloping right to the base of the pillar, and then you have this half pillar that comes out. So it's still a single block, but you could use it just a little more aesthetically pleasing pillar base, if you will, that you could also use for like support or something like that. I think that would be really cool. I don't know if there may be a modder out there who's actually done that. I truly don't know. I see 7 messages there. 6 of those messages are actually inventory, so I don't know what that is. But I'll look off screen. So let me go here. That is still loading. Not a big surprise there. So I continually whine and complain about about the amount of memory that Space Engineers uses, and I know this is really small, but Space Engineers here using 2.7 gig, which actually isn't bad. So I have seen this get up to absolutely hideous numbers, way beyond the recommended statistics of the game. And while I don't necessarily have a problem with the if you've got it, I can use it type of a concept, I feel so. Let me put this all in perspective here. I'm using Windows 7. I know some people find that laughable. I totally despised Windows 8. I thought Windows 8 was nothing more than a graphics update, which kind of it was. So just like 7 was to Vista a graphics update, I really didn't find any dramatic differences in anything but GUI related stuff. So it didn't really do anything under the background that was different from 7, not dramatically different. Windows 10, not even going to get into that. So Windows 7. So this is the built-in task manager in this case, and I'm looking at the performance values, the processes in this case, and you can see the next largest user of memory happens to be Chrome. Now, granted, Chrome has got 20, 30 different spawns here, so the total value so Chrome is unique because every window that's open, every tab that's open has its own memory. And I'm not sure that's a good thing or a bad thing. On the good side is the nice thing about isolated environments is a crash in an isolated environment will not crash other environments. So that's a good thing. On the flip side is now you have to have a base memory requirement for each tab, which does tend to eat up memory, especially if it's not using that. But you can see that moving. So my next available, or my next user, is 200 meg, which to me is still a little bit silly, with Space Engineers being into the 2 gig range, okay, almost 3 gig. So I don't know that this is actually going to load, because sometimes Space Engineers is Space Engineers. So I hate to take up screen time for this to load where it may actually not load at all. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead, and even though we're kind of anticlimactic ending here, I'm going to go ahead and sign off rather than have you endure. So this is Kenty Tiger signing off. We thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.